Hello BookTube and welcome to my 2020 library tour. So far in the past few weeks we've done cookbooks and art books, literary fiction and assorted fiction, assorted nonfiction and history, and classics and the other classics, and the still paltry poetry collection. And now we begin the exhaustive science fiction and fantasy section of my library. Even though we've already done some, because I had them in my lower part of my headboard bookcase, but this is the rest of science fiction and fantasy, and it will take us for the rest of the year. Of course, it's only like 2 weeks, but still. Anyway, let's get started. First up, Foxvulant of the Snowy Mountain by Jin Yong. This is a standalone work of wuxia fiction. It's sort of a Chinese fantasy fiction that uses martial arts. It's sort of like a fantastical take on martial arts. And Jin Yong is one of the most famous practitioners of wuxia. He was alongside two others. They were called the three tripods of wuxia. And he's really the only one who's had much in the way of English translations. I have one of the other three, but I think that's the only work of his, and we'll get to that in about a week or so. Anyway, so Foxvulant of the Snowy Mountain is about a group of rogues trying to find a treasure. And they are eventually tasked with aiding a monk in defeating a very powerful troublemaker, the Foxvulant, or the Flying Fox. And this book is really, really interesting and fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. The translations may be a bit iffy, but on the whole, I really did love this book. Actually, now that I think about it, there is a sequel or a prequel to this, actually, so I don't think it's actually a standalone. The next book by Jin Yong is a standalone, and that's The Book and the Sword by Jin Yong. His real name was Louis Cha. And this one's titled by Louis Cha. Most of the rest of his work, I think, is Jin Yong. And this one is about the Qinlong Emperor and the belief that he was actually not, he was actually a Han Chinese rather than Manchu. So anyway, I haven't gotten around to reading this one yet, and hopefully I will get to it soon, but I have another work by his that I'm planning on starting in January, which I'll get to on Friday. So next up is some books by Sam Sykes. This is The Skybound Sea, Book 3 of Eon's Gate. This is Black Halo, Book 2 of the same series. And then we have 3 books by John Sprunk. Shadow's Master, Shadow's Lure, and Shadow's Sun, which I read about 2 years ago, I think, or maybe very early last year, and I thought it was okay, but yeah. I actually think it would have been better with the main antagonist being the main protagonist. Anyway. So next we have a classic. Dune by Frank Herbert. Um, this is one of the most famous science fiction novels of all time. It's about Paul Atreides, a young heir to Duke Leto. Um, Duke Leto is forced to give up his planet Caladan for Arrakis, which is much more valuable, but also much more precarious. And they are attacked by their rivals, the Harkonnens, and Paul and his mother are forced to flee into the desert and seek aid with sort of marginal people called the Fremen, who aren't part of the imperial society. And gradually, Paul and his mother take over the Fremen and then launch a rebellion on Arrakis, or Dune, that eventually forces the Emperor to abdicate and name Paul as his successor. Even that really should be Irulan, but it's Paul. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. Quite love it. Although I think sometimes I do have quite different interpretation than most others, but this is really good. I love Dune. Next is The Third God by Ricardo Pinto. This is the concluding volume of The Stone Dance of the Chameleon. This came out, nearly 20 years ago now. It's it's like a fantasy novel without necessarily magic. It's sort of like it's a magicless fantasy. I've read bits of the first, I think I've read the first book, but I haven't gone on to any of the others, and probably I'll make a note to try to read the whole series, because I have the whole series at some point this year, or this coming year. Next is Catherine Kerr's A Time of Omens, Book 2 of the Westland Cycle. I want to say I picked this up from the Friends at the Library book sale nook. The Tree of Swords and Jewels by C.J. Cherry. Again, I think I picked this up from the book sale nook. All Wheel of Time books I picked up from the book sale nook. This is Winter's Heart, Book 9 of Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. This is Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is The Lions of Al-Rassan by Guy Gabriel Kay. So Guy Gabriel Kay is a major science fiction and fantasy writer. He got to start off working with the Tolkien's estate, and then later began his own quasi sort of Tolkien-esque fantasy, the Fiannavar Tapestry, and then later expanded out to do his own thing. Most of his work, particularly after Tigana, is a sort of more kind of a magicless historical fantasy, where he takes history and sort of uses it and transforms it into sort of an alternate world. And there's an interesting article in Blackgate magazine, came out like last week, that talked about Guy Gabriel Kay's later books, which is very interesting, and if I remember, I will leave a link down below. Anyway, next is On Appel Horse by Piers Anthony. Knife of Dreams, Book 11 of the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. The Shattered World by Michael Reeves. The Path of Daggers, Book 8 of the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I think I've read this one. Maybe. I don't remember. I know I've read one of them. It wasn't the first one, it was like a middle book that I thought at the time was interesting, but obviously not entirely sure what was going on because that was the only one I'd read. Crown of Swords, Book 7 of the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. A Song for Our Bone by Gabriel K. This is about sort of a fantasy version of the Albigensian Crusade and the Provence region of France. The Last Magicians by John Jakes. Red Wall by Brian Jacques, or Jacques. I think I've seen some of the cartoon adaptation of that. A Meeting at Corvallis by S.M. Starling. Annoyingly, book 2 of, or like it's within the series, it's not like the first book, which kind of annoyed me because I was hoping for the first book and it's not. Kind of annoys me. But anyway. Cryptonomicon by Neil Stevenson. And we round out this part of the first part of science fiction and fantasy with some more Dune. God Emperor of Dune, which takes place a few thousand years after Dune, and focuses on Paul Atreides' son, Leto Atreides, who has since transformed into a human sandworm hybrid. And it's actually really good. Although, I mean, there are some aspects of the world building that I kind of find a bit annoying. Generally speaking, I mean, I've talked about this quite a bit, where the technological advancement is sort of advanced and well thought out, but the social sort of change is rather more stagnant given the span of time. But anyway, even though, of course, Dune is set into sort of tens of thousands of years in the future with a space empire and space feudalism. But anyway, next is Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. Quite good. Love the sci-fi miniseries of that. And Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. So yeah, I don't have Heretics in Chapter House, but I've been kind of, maybe I'll look for it eventually and have another Dune readathon. I think last year there was a bit of a Dune readathon, yeah, that I participated in, and then it kind of ended up sort of sputtering out towards Heretics or I think Chapter House, one of the two. But anyway, so that wraps up part 1 of the science fiction and fantasy section. I'll be right back with part 2 because I've got to do these 2 at a time until I finish on January 31st. So anyway, BookTube, I'll sign up for now and I will be right back. Thank you, BookTube.